In a small village nestled between rolling green hills and a slow, winding river, there lived a farmer named Elias. He was not wealthy, nor was he poor. He existed somewhere in the comfortable middle. The farmer worked a modest plot of land with his wife, Marta. She had grown up watching her own mother scrub floors for richer women, and she had made a silent promise to herself long ago that her life would be different. Together, they kept a small farm. A few cows, a vegetable garden, some chickens, and a handful of geese. But of all the geese, there was one that the farmer had always found peculiar. Her feathers had an unusual sheen to them. Not white exactly, but a faint, creamy colour. She kept mostly to herself, avoiding the squabbling of the other geese with a kind of quiet dignity. The farmer had named her Pearl, though his wife thought it was foolish to name an animal you might one day eat. It was on an ordinary Tuesday morning in early spring. The farmer went out to collect eggs from the yard. He moved from nest to nest, his basket filling slowly. And then he came to Pearl. She looked up at the farmer with those strange amber eyes of hers, as if to say, "Go on then, have a look." The farmer reached beneath her, and his fingers closed around something that didn't feel like an egg should feel, but heavy, dense. He pulled it out and held it up to the early morning light. It was a golden egg, solid, gleaming, unmistakable gold. The farmer stood there for a long moment, completely still. Pearl ruffled her feathers and looked away, apparently satisfied that the transaction was complete. He ran inside to show his wife. She turned it over in her hands 3 times. She held it up to the window. She set it on the table and stared at it, as if daring it to reveal itself as a trick. It did not. "We need to take this to town," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "We need to find out what it's worth." The goldsmith in town was a stout, sceptical man named Brennan, who had spent 30 years examining metals and had grown deeply suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. He turned the egg over in his hands, ran it across a testing stone, applied a small amount of acid, peered at the result through a glass. Then he looked up at the farmer with an expression of pure, uncomplicated astonishment. "This is real," the goldsmith said. 24 carats. "Where on earth did you get this?" "My goose laid it," said the farmer. There was a pause. "Your goose?" asked the goldsmith. "My goose," Elias replied proudly. The goldsmith paid them a sum that was, by itself, enough to cover months of their usual expenses. The farmer and his wife walked home very happy. They had a goose that laid golden eggs, and their lives were about to change. The next week, Pearl laid another golden egg, and the week after that, another. Within a month, the rhythm of their lives had changed entirely. The farmer would rise before dawn, walk out to the yard with a kind of reverent quiet, and return with the egg. Every month they would make the trip to the goldsmith's shop, who had stopped looking surprised, but he always examined each egg carefully. With the money, the farmer repaired the roof, which had been leaking for a while. He bought a second cow and hired a young man from the village to help with the heavier work in the fields. They were able to give money to his sister, whose husband was sick, putting the family in a difficult state. They ate better, slept better, and for the first time in their lives, they stopped worrying about tomorrow. Marta had a new dress made, one that she wore on Sundays and felt, for the first time in her life, genuinely fine. For a while, they were happy. Genuinely, simply happy. The farmer found himself spending more time in the yard watching Pearl. He brought her extra grain, the good kind he used to think was too expensive to waste on geese. He built her a small separate enclosure, away from the others. "She's something, isn't she?" the farmer said to his wife one evening, watching the goose settle into her nest as the sun went down. "She's valuable," said Marta. The farmer looked at his wife. "That's not quite the same thing." She didn't answer. It was around the 6th month that things began to shift. The money had brought comfort, but comfort has a strange effect on people. It raises the floor of what feels normal, so that yesterday's luxury becomes today's expectation, and yesterday's dream becomes tomorrow's baseline. They were doing well, but Marta had begun to notice all the ways in which they were not yet doing as well as certain other people. The merchant on the hill and his wife, for instance, the one with the 4 horses and the fancy house. 1 golden egg a day was generous, it was extraordinary. But it had begun to feel slow. The wife started doing the math out loud at dinner. If the goose laid 1 egg per week, and each egg was worth this much, then in a year they would have this much, and in 5 years they would have this much. The farmer would listen and nod, but feel vaguely uneasy. "We're doing well," he would say. "We could be doing better," she would reply. Then the idea came, fully formed, the way that bad ideas often do, presenting themselves not as recklessness but as simple logic. "Think about it," she said one night in the darkness of their bedroom. "If the goose lays golden eggs, then there must be gold inside her. It must be how it works. The gold forms inside her, and then one egg's worth comes out each week. But all the rest of it is still in there." "We don't know that," said the farmer. "We don't know how it works. We've never known how it works. Does it even matter?" "It matters," said his wife, "because if we're patient, we get one egg. But if we're smart, we could have everything at once. All of it. We'd never have to worry about anything again. Not ever." The farmer felt the unease in him turn into fear. "She's a living creature," he said finally. "She's a goose," said the wife, and for the first time in their marriage, the gap between those two statements felt very wide indeed. The farmer thought of the goose for a while, but he also thought of his struggling sister's family. He thought of what it would mean to never have to count coins again. "All right," he said softly. "All right." They told themselves it was logical, that it was in a way even merciful. They told themselves many things that night, the way people do when they have already made a decision and need only to justify it. The next morning, the farmer sharpened his knife. It was still dark when he went to the yard. Pearl was in her nest, calm and still sleeping. She didn't startle when he approached. She had never had reason to fear him. He worked quickly, because he needed to, and then he stood back and looked at what he had done. There was no gold. There were no eggs waiting inside, no treasure chamber, nothing special. There was only what you would find inside any ordinary goose. Pearl was gone, and with her the golden eggs, gone forever in a single moment of impatience. The farmer stood in the yard for a long time as the sun came up. Then he went inside and told his wife. They did not speak much that day, nor for many days after. There was nothing to say that wasn't already understood. They still had what they had saved, enough to live comfortably for some years, if they were careful. They were not ruined, but they had ruined something, and that is a different kind of poverty. What hurt most was the realization that they had been given not just wealth, but a sustainable, daily, renewable kind of abundance, a future that kept arriving, morning after morning, without being grasped at, and the grasping had ended it. Now, let's take a look at what we can learn from this tale, because it's certainly more than just some old fable. What is this goose? And what does this classic story teach us about money today? Lesson 1. Never destroy your income-producing assets. This is the central lesson of the entire story and the most important financial principle ever. The goose was an income-producing asset. She converted her existence into wealth without needing to be managed. And the moment the farmer destroyed her, they permanently eliminated their income stream. In our world, an income-producing asset is anything that generates regular cash flow simply by existing, like a rental property, a stock portfolio that pays dividends, a business that generates recurring revenue, a royalty from a book or a patent. These are your geese. And the single greatest financial mistake people make is slaughtering them. Think about the person who builds up a solid investment portfolio over 10 years, then panics during a market crash and sells everything at the bottom. They just killed the goose. Think about the small business owner who, rather than reinvesting profits back into the business to keep it growing, extracts every cent for personal luxuries. The business weakens. The golden eggs get smaller until they stop. Or consider someone who owns a rental property and rather than maintaining it and keeping good tenants, neglects repairs, loses the tenants, and lets the property deteriorate until it's worth a fraction of what it was. That's a dead goose. At a personal level, for most people in their working years, their primary goose is their own health and their earning capacity. Their skills, their reputation, their energy. Every time you neglect your health, burn yourself out, or fail to invest in your own professional development, you are slowly, quietly harming the goose. The knife doesn't have to be dramatic to be fatal. It can be years of poor sleep, or choosing short-term income over long-term skill building, or burning bridges with people who matter professionally. The rule is simple. Identify what generates your income and protect it with everything you have. Lesson 2. Sustainable wealth is built slowly, so respect the process. This lesson applies anytime you feel impatient with where you are financially. If you're in the early stages of building savings, it will feel agonizingly slow at first. The numbers will feel small and the progress will feel invisible. That feeling is normal. That feeling is actually the process working. The egg is being laid. The question is whether you can resist the urge to demand all the gold at once. The tragedy of the story is not that the goose couldn't make them rich. She absolutely could have, and was in the process of doing exactly that. The tragedy is that they stopped the process before it reached its destination. This is the story of almost every get-rich-quick failure in history. The stock market, given enough time, has returned an average of roughly 10% per year over the last century. A person who invests consistently and patiently over 30 years will almost certainly retire wealthy. But most people see someone else getting rich faster and feel that their own process is broken. They pull their money out. They chase a hotter investment. They slaughter the goose, hoping to cash in quickly, but end up ruining everything. Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people in human history, made a large majority of his total net worth after the age of 65. Not because he suddenly got smarter at 65, because he had been patient for 50 years before that, letting the process of compounding run without interruption. He never killed the goose. He fed it every single year and walked away. So financial maturity is largely the ability to honor a slow process in a culture that celebrates overnight success, to stay in your seat when everything in you wants to get up and run. Lesson 3. Greed recalibrates your sense of enough, and that is dangerous. One of the subtlest and most psychologically sophisticated aspects of this story is the way the couple's contentment erodes. At first, a golden egg feels like a miracle. Then it feels like a windfall. Then, within months, it begins to feel like barely enough. And then it begins to feel slow. This is not a character flaw unique to them. It is a documented psychological phenomenon called hedonic adaptation, the tendency for humans to quickly return to a baseline level of satisfaction regardless of what they achieve or acquire. Every raise you get at work feels wonderful for about 2 months and then becomes your new normal. Every upgrade delivers happiness briefly and then disappears into the background of your life. This means that the pursuit of more, if it is not accompanied by a deliberate practice of gratitude and sufficiency, is a treadmill with no finish line. This is how people with high incomes still live paycheck to paycheck, or how lottery winners manage to be broke within 5 years, because the sudden wealth recalibrates their sense of normal without the habits or the framework to sustain it. They got all the gold at once. There was no goose left. Deciding how much is enough is one of the most powerful financial exercises you can do, because it gives greed something to run up against. Without a defined ceiling, desire expands to fill all available space, and no amount will ever feel like enough. These 3 lessons, taken together, form something like a philosophy of financial life. Protect what generates your income, respect the pace of sustainable growth, and define what enough means to you. The goose cannot teach you all of this if you kill her before she's finished. If you enjoyed this story and learned something from it, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Tales from the Money Tree.